Welcome to As Time Goes By. In response to inquiries and comments and suggestions from you, the viewers, we've ventured to the east, and we're going to be telling you about the village and rapidly growing city of Eudora. So we'll be right back to share more of Eudora's history. Many of us, as we go along on K10, if we live in Lawrence, we pass through Eudora and we wonder, boy, I've liked Eudora, but I haven't stopped by lately. Well, we're really going to have a chance today to pull into Lawrence and into Eudora and find out more about Eudora. And then our host today will be Cindy Higgins. She is the author of Kansas Breweries and Beer,
1854 to 1911.
Which you brought out a couple years ago.
Around 1992.
Right.
It was about the state's 90 breweries, and I did it with Chuck Magrill down at the Free State Brewery in Lawrence.
And you're now
Vice President of the Eudora Area Historical Society.
Right. And involved in promotions and development of maps and historical tours and walks.
Right. We do a lot of work in the Eudora Area Historical Society, and we're gearing up for a German Fest here in the fall.
Okay. And let's start out, I guess historians like to start at the beginning. What I know briefly is that the Shawnee Indian tribe was owned the land where we are now, but actually it wasn't really belonging to a tribe in whole, it was belonging to individuals, right?
Well, I think if you go back, this was obviously the area that the Kansas Indians roamed, and then you get the Indian treaties with President Jackson, and he gave the eastern tribes land in this area, and so the Shawnee came over here to Jansen County, and I think it was around 1854 that he gave the Fish tribe, who had been living in Ohio and then had gone over there to Johnson County, this land, about 1,000 acres, where the Wakarusa meets the Kansas River.
And it was obviously an attractive place because a lot of travelers were going through this area on the Oregon-California Trail, right?
Yeah, and it was also the site of an earlier trail, the Westport-Fremont, which pretty much went right through this actual town of Eudora. The Oregon Trail was more south of town.
Along where modern K10 is, for example? Right,
and then there's a ford there called Blue Jacket Ford, which was named after one of these Shawnee Indians. And there's been a lot of work done on the Blue Jacket Ford. And there's names still written there of travelers who passed over there, and I think 1 or 2 graves.
Was there a trail that went from Fort Leavenworth to Fort Scott that went through Eudora too?
That I don't know.
Okay. Well, that's what I thought. So there were several trails that crossed through this area and brought it into the view of a lot of people.
Right.
One of the things that we found out is that the travelers that went on the Oregon-California trails said that this was the most fertile valley between here and the Willamette in Oregon, and so we know this area was very attractive. They came through here in late April, early May, and saw a beautiful land. And surely, when they came through this area, once the Fish family had arrived, not only did they see beautiful land, but they saw a real, I've seen several comments about the cordial hospitality of the Fish family.
He was supposed to be a very cordial person, and this was an area of blue stem grasses, and then there was, obviously lots of forest, and you're right here on the river, so you're getting that really good riverbed land. And he had a ferry across where the Wakarusa and Carr. That's one way he made his living. And then he also had a way station, which is a little bit south of here on Elm Street, around 17th Street. And it was just a large house where travelers would all come and sleep in mass, and they slept on buffalo robes.
Yeah, I think I've seen descriptions where dozens of people literally would sleep in one room in the Fish Hotel.
Right.
So it's not exactly what we would call motel accommodations of the kind we're used to, but travelers were grateful for any place out of the storm, any shelter that they could find, and plus to find someone who was a cordial, hospitable host like Pasco Fish was. And so therein lies the name. Eudora.
Eudora. That was his 13-year-old daughter when the German settlers came here in the spring of 1857. And so local lore is that they named it after Eudora. Eudora is the Greek word for gift, just like Pasco Fish is the Greek word for Easter. and he was a white man who was living with this tribe. There was, I think when they first came here, the Fish tribe had 40 people in it. 5 of them were whites, and they had come from the Ohio area, and they'd been going to a Quaker school. When they came over to the Shawnee Mission area, they went to a Methodist mission there, and then they came over here where Dr. Abraham Still, you know Dr. Abraham Still, right? Mm-hmm.
He was a famous, also a Baldwin City resident, as it turns out, but involved with the Wakarusa Indian Methodist mission that was in this area. So the Fish is here from 54 to 57. Then what happens in 57?
Well, I think 1856, a German settlement company.
Oh, a little earlier.
Right.
Okay.
They had come and sent out a couple of scouts to find a good area to settle in. Right. So they came to Eudora, they liked what they saw, they went back and reported, then they started negotiations with Pasco Fish. And basically they wanted about a 200 block area, and they were willing to pay $10,000. So Pasco Fish sold them, I think it was 774.5 acres, where the Wakarusa meets the Kaw, and then in the spring there was a party of about 16 men and 4 women and several children, and they came here. They once again built a large, one-room cabin where they lived. They ate spoonbill catfish, wild turkeys, and they sent some guys out to Salina to get in buffalo, and they lived off that the first year.
So they open the land up, and how quickly before they're joined by many other Germans?
Well, I think the next year about 8 other Germans came out, and these were all people that had a trade. They were stonemasons, they were carpenters, a doctor, and several businessmen.
And they go to work establishing the community of Eudora. Were they attracted to Kansas because they were anti-slavery, or was that sort of an accidental choice that they came to Kansas because it was trying to become an anti-slavery state?
In my readings of Eudora, I don't think that was much of an issue. They basically wanted to take advantage of the trail opportunities, the fertile soil, a lot of them, the Kansas City connection. So I think they realized that this was an area that they could make things happen in.
What happened to Pasco Fish in Eudora? Why does he claim land? Does he stay in the area?
I think he stayed in the area, but not that long. Went down to Oklahoma, and he ultimately died in the 1890s. He froze to death outside of a house. It was a dismal end.
In the Eudora 1976 bicentennial history, a great effort was gone to locate relatives, and there are still people who are related to Eudora Fish, right?
There are some. I think there might even be one family, but the family did disperse, and Fern Long, who has done an awful lot of work on this, and she's an excellent Eudora historian, she would know more about that, but I really think there's just maybe a remnant or two of fish here in this area.
So the Germans come, and they start developing the community, and what are the kinds of businesses that develop here, and some of the names of the people who are involved in those businesses? I guess, for example, the main street that we have today, as people go through downtown Eudora, is that roughly the same size of the downtown 100 years ago, or do you have much of a feel for that?
The first businesses, like a lot of these cities, were along the river.
Right.
And so they had those, but it was Frederick Pilla who around 1860 started a department store. And he told his brother Charles to come out. And Charles joined him, I think, in the late 1860s. And he brought his Staten Island bride. And they came out here. Frederick died, Charles took over, and he turned the Pilla store into a very large operation. It's about 8,000 square feet. He lived upstairs on the south side. They rented out part of the upstairs to those traveling salesmen coming through. It was a 3-story building, and he had a whole city block behind him just full of farm implements. And he was in business, gosh, I don't know, way past the turn of the century. And once you're a businessman, you get involved with setting up the banks, and he got involved with the group who did those mineral springs out there by the Wakarusa.
Yeah, right.
They had the 10 springs, and they turned that's one of the things that sort of makes Eudora noteworthy among towns. It was a great amusement park in the 1890s with the dance pavilions, the bowling, and people would go boating up and down the Wakarusa. It kind of fizzled, though.
Well, it was a great hope for a while. I mean, it was sort of if we think of Excelsior Springs and Warm Springs and Hot Springs, springs were believed to have therapeutic and medicinal effects. And the other thing is they were ways to beat the heat.
Right.
In our day and age of air conditioning, we tend to forget, but they loved the idea of also going out and catching the breezes and then soaking in the water and catching a little respite from the summer heat. So it was a very successful promotion. I mean, they thought, well, if it can happen in Excelsior Springs, why can't it happen here? And who was to say? At that point, there was no great thing that proved that Excelsior Springs would last and the Eudora Mineral Springs wouldn't last.
Pilla also brought a lot more Germans over here. He still continued his ties with the immigration societies, so he's responsible for bringing more people out. Another noteworthy businessman was Charles Luftholz, and he started the lumber yard, which was a large operation, even though he lived sort of east of here of town, and he built his grand house in the 1860s. And he was a he raised a lot of cattle. He had the lumber yard, and then he started a bank about 2 years after Pilla started his bank, and that was in the 1890s. And his bank, Luftholz's, is the forerunner of the Kaw Valley Bank, which is down here on our downtown street right now. It's our local bank. We also have another bank from Leavenworth. And Luftholz had, when he built his bank, which went through a lot of different transformations, at one time it was the theater, and then in the upstairs there is still a stage, and sometimes they'd have dances up there, they'd have the movie shows, and the people who own that building now still have that stage in their upstairs where they live.
There's a separateness to communities such as Eudora in the 19th century. Yes, the railroad connection comes through, which the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, but there's not the hard surfaced roads that interconnect, nor is there a line or satellite transmission that helps Sunflower Cablevision to transmit its signal from Lawrence to Eudora. Those things are not here in the 19th century. So there's more of a sense of separateness and distinctness to a community like Eudora. And in a few minutes we'll be back and talk some more about this wonderful community we call Eudora, Kansas. Welcome back. We're going to talk a little bit about Eudora in the 20th century and the forces that have shaped the modern Eudora, and then we're going to basically have Cindy's help and some things that you can drive into Eudora and drive around and see when you come into the community. So I always say in Lawrence, the two things that have made the modern Lawrence were World War II and the GI Bill. What would you say would be, as one thinks of a community that was, say, under 1,000 at the time of World War II, to a community that's probably now lapping up on the edge of 4,000? What's created the modern Eudora?
I think most anybody in Eudora would say it was the Sunflower ammunition plant. And that's over there by Clearview City in DeSoto. And when they put that plant into operation, within 6 months, I think 10,000 people came to this area and they needed a place to stay. And they came to Eudora, they stayed in chicken houses, sheds, basement, garages. Everybody opened up their house and got a renter who was working over there at Sunflower Ammunition. A lot of people came from Missouri, and a lot particularly from Arkansas.
And then after World War II, why don't we go back to the quiet, peaceful, sleepy Eudora of pre-World War II?
They stayed on. They said, hey, this is a good area, and they continue working at the plant and over there in Lawrence.
And then more recently, the opening of the K-10 corridor.
Oh, that's made a major impact, because we've got new subdivisions, we've got commuters living here going back and forth, and I think it's still going to keep growing, but those two have probably been the major population influx.
And in recent times, the major controversy, when was the present Eudora High School built, and when will the new Eudora High School be occupied?
The new Eudora High School was, I think it was the last year or two, where it's over there south of town along the highway, and they tore down the original high school section of the school that's now known as our junior high school. and the voters had to vote for the new high school, and that was a controversial issue. Therefore, I don't want to talk about it.
But the high school building that they tore down dated from when was it constructed? Do you know?
I don't
40s,
know.
50s?
The original schools of Eudora, there was one on Church Street that is now used as a rental property, and I think that went, I'm not clear on that.
All right, so the schools, as is understandable in any community, are a major concern, and certainly Lawrence knows about the issues of one high school versus two high schools, and how that is an important issue, and hence in Eudora, the moving to a new high school, physically much more distant from what might have been envisioned by those who grew up here before 1940 as the Eudora limits, if you will. But that's the nature of the modern Eudora. So those are the things that we see today, and now, you know, I know in Lawrence at least 25% of the population lives in Eudora, lives in Lawrence, but works either in Kansas City or Topeka. Do you have a feeling that there's a lot of that going on?
I really, obviously Eudora has a lot of, we have a lot of businesses. We've opened up a business corridor on the new highway, which employs a lot of people. I know people that work all over the place. And my husband works in Kansas City, I work in Lawrence. But Eudora does have a lot of, it's continuing to grow in terms of business opportunities. There was, I think the first plant was UARCO, which now has a different name, and that employed a lot of people from this area.
So if somebody comes to visit you today from out of town, and you want to show them around in Eudora, where do you go?
Well, I would start with a walk in what I call Old Eudora. It's the downtown section. And usually everybody likes the Old Holy Family Catholic Church, which was built around, I don't know, early 1860s. And it was for a mostly German congregation. There is a new Holy Family from a former parochial school, but they open up the Old Holy Family at Christmas time for special occasions, and it's very nice. I think that I would go walk by the German Turner Hall there on Church Street. In fact, I would just walk on Church Street. Church Street has two churches there, the Methodist Church and St. Paul's. It also has two former churches, the Black Church, which is now personal residence. There is the former Temperance Hall, which is right next to St. Paul. There were several houses there on Church Street that were formerly businesses, say it was a grocery store or something else, and there were some very nice houses there. For instance, the one that's right next to the Methodist Church is the former Methodist parsonage, and it's a Victorian-style gingerbread. It's nice. I would also go to the former City Hall that was a school from 1860 to 1866. And there is the school bell is right down here on our main street, and it was also the City Hall for several years, and we have obviously a new City Hall, and which they had to move the old one to its present location on Maple Street. I like being down by the rivers. The rivers is nice, the Wakarusa access.
What about the suburban residences of Lutholtz and Pilla?
Well, in Eudora, there are two houses that stand out. One is the one Charles Pilla built in 1894. There's several rumors that it has tunnels that go back and forth from his store down to the river. They're always interested in some archaeology student to come prove that. And it was the auction they had there in 1963 of his surviving daughter was said to be one of the best antique auctions around. And it was the first house that had a bathtub. The Charles Lutholtz house, which is still in the original family, that's also a beautiful example of architecture. Those two houses stand out. Gosh, we're in the park. Eudora has two parks. One park has the gazebo, which is where the annual CPA picnic is held, and it has been since around 1910. It started in 1901. There's another park down there by City Hall, which is nice.
Did the CPA picnics, was that about horse thieves or wolf hunts or rabbit hunts, or what's the cause? First of all, is it Central Protective Association?
It's Central Protective Association.
Okay.
Don't forget it.
Right.
Okay, that's
I've committed
a hot
it to
topic.
memory. Right.
There were several lodges in Douglas County. It started around 1863 in Missouri, the Anti-Horse Thief Association. This was the Central Protective Branch. In Eudora, it started in 1901, and they started an annual picnic down there by the Wakarusa Russa, where you took the Hagenpuch footbridge over for 5 cents toll, and then all those floods damaged Durs Grove where it was held, and they came over here, and they used to build a wooden platform for the dances on Saturday night, and then they replaced that with the concrete. And so the CPA picnic is a highlight, always the third weekend in July. Eudora also has the Cub Scout Fish Fry held here in the same area. That's usually in May. And they are going to have a German Fest in October. I think it's the 4th. They're going to see if that works, since this is obviously a German community with several German names.
Yeah, well, I think that's a festival, but that's been waiting to be happening. I know Lawrence has experimented with them, but I think when it comes to Germanic heritage, Eudora's got anything Lawrence can put up, and more of a sense of integrity because of the preservation of the buildings that have occurred. Though the more you talk, the more I realize that there's been substantial change even in a much slower paced community of Eudora, that a lot of things have changed. They're maybe not so much demolished, but their uses have changed, and they're sometimes going from church to commercial or to home.
There's a lot of houses in Eudora that used to be something else, and that makes it fun. Take, for example, the meat plant. That's been a meat market for well over 100 years. Its first owners was a slaughterhouse. It specialized in liver sausage, and now Tom Pyle has a meat market there. He closed his slaughterhouse down with the changing habits of the American consumer not going so much for meat, and now he specializes in beef jerky and sausage.
And also display of historical Eudora pictures.
Right, he's taken several photographs and he's done blow-ups of them, and it's really nice to go in there. A lot of people like to go in there and see them, so it's a mini museum of sorts. Also downtown is the Pilla building, which we talked about, Pilla. It's gone through several transformations, notably a grocery store, a restaurant, but now it's turning into a state-of-the-art recording studio. And as they've been tearing apart the building, they've found several artifacts, old bills of sale, different things, and there's always been a rumor that there's that Pilla hid his treasures down there, so that's been a motivator. There's 2 original buildings, the old Oddfellows Lodge and the Masons, and those have been used for a variety of sources, but they still have their nice storefronts. There's, other buildings downtown.
When you take people through Eudora, do you find that you can do it through car or walking, or doesn't it make much difference to you?
Well, it obviously depends on the person. I might be the last of the walkers. I like walking.
Like to get that exercise.
So to me, it's fun, especially when the trees are all bloomed out and different things. So I think you could come to Eudora and park your car downtown, go for a walk, and there'll be all sorts of surprises.
What about the quality of life, the things like, I grew up in a small town of 5,000 people, and we used to just get on our bikes and ride around town, and our parents weren't concerned about where our children were. Do you feel that people in Eudora maybe grant a little bit greater latitude to their children than, say, many parents in Lawrence would, or what are your feelings about that?
Well, I think you first asked about quality of life, and so I don't want to tell you anything because I don't want anybody else to move here. So it's okay. It's okay.
It's not very nice.
No, you don't want to come here.
Right.
So I think it's great. I find it's that sense of community, which I think you really need, because you get involved. Baseball is really big here.
Right.
So we have nice baseball fields, the library, everything's so close together with their summer reading program, their different events. We've got the Girl Scouts, the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts. 4-H is really big here. So there's a lot of different opportunities to get involved in community activities, and gosh, they need people. And so you get to know people a lot faster and quicker. As terms of safety, I'm a mom. I worry about my kids all the time. They could be any place. I worry about them. But I know children do. Everybody rides their bike around, and you know everybody. After you've been here a couple of years, people know who your kids are, and they'll call you up.
That's great.
That's good. So don't tell anybody.
No, we won't tell anybody.
It's a secret.
Just forget everything you've learned here. But do come for a visit. Do come to enjoy the community of Eudora, and we hope you have enjoyed. We certainly have enjoyed having Cindy Higgins' help and the crew at Channel 6. We especially want to salute Leslie Carpenter, who's leaving us for San Francisco.
Bye, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. Bye-bye.